Mother, mother.
They didn't ban these songs because they were obscene. They banned them because they were true. And the truth, in 1960s and 1970s America, was something certain people in power could not afford to let Black America hear out loud. Some of these records had their promotional copies returned to the label broken in half. Some of these artists were blacklisted from venues overnight. Some of these songs, the most important music these artists ever made, were quietly buried with no single, no radio campaign, no push. Just silence. Say it loud! Let me hear you! Welcome to Rhythm and Legacy. These are 12 soul and R&B songs that got banned or blocked from radio in the 1960s and 1970s. And number 1 is the record that should have changed everything, and almost did. Number 12, Nina Simone, Mississippi Goddamn, 1964.
Mississippi Goddamn, this is our last tune.
She wrote it in under an hour, sat down at her piano in 1963, after hearing about the assassination of civil rights activist Medgar Evers in Mississippi and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, a bombing that killed 4 black girls in their Sunday clothes, and the song poured out of her in less time than it takes to cook a meal. Nina Simone called it her first civil rights song. She introduced it at Carnegie Hall in March 1964 as a show tune for a show that hasn't begun yet, and then she sang it with everything she had.
Quest for it.
The backlash was immediate and physical. Radio stations across the South banned the song outright. Promotional copies, the 45 sent to radio stations to get airplay, were returned to her label broken in half. Not just refused, broken. Stations that had played her music for years cracked her records in two and sent the pieces back as a message. She also found herself blacklisted by music venues that had previously welcomed her. The price of singing the truth out loud was paid in bookings she never got, in stages she was never invited back to.
Everybody knows about Mississippi Goddamn.
She performed Mississippi Goddamn at the March from Selma to Montgomery in 1965, on a stage built from empty coffin crates, in front of 10,000 people, so tightly packed that 57 of them fainted. She changed the lyric that day to "Selma made me lose my rest," and the crowd understood exactly what she meant. Nina Simone died in France in 2003. The records they cracked in half are still playing.
Stand the pressure much longer. Somebody say.
Number 11, The Impressions, We're a Winner, 1967. Curtis Mayfield recorded it in front of a live studio audience, a deliberate choice, because he wanted the emotional commitment of real people in that room to underscore every word. The song was simple, unified, joyful. It said Black Americans were moving forward, we're going to make it, we're not going to be stopped. And that idea, that simple, direct, hopeful idea, was enough to get the song banned from several radio stations across the country during the 1967 riots. Mayfield later told the Chicago Tribune with characteristic quiet, "We were young and didn't know these songs would have that effect." The Impressions had been building toward this moment for years. Curtis Mayfield had been writing civil rights anthems since the early 1960s. Keep on Pushing, People Get Ready, songs that Martin Luther King Jr. used as unofficial soundtracks for the movement. But We're a Winner was more direct than anything that had come before it. It hit number 1 on the R&B chart in March 1968 and peaked at number 14 on the Hot 100. The numbers proved people wanted to hear it. Certain program directors made sure they couldn't. When student protesters at a university occupation in the late 1960s needed a rallying song, something to hold on to while their demands were being refused, they turned to We're a Winner. They played it on repeat when some of their demands were finally agreed to, as a mark of celebration. A song that several radio stations had refused to air became the anthem of a protest, carried entirely by the people the radio had tried to silence. Curtis Mayfield used the phrase as the motto of his Curtum Records label. That is how you respond to a ban. You build your own label and keep going. Number 10. James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, 1968.
Say it loud!
James Brown recorded this on August 7, 1968, 4 months after Martin Luther King Jr. was shot dead on that Memphis balcony. The country was burning. Cities were on fire. And James Brown, who had spent the night after King's assassination, walking the streets of Boston and pleading on television for people not to riot, doing more to prevent violence that week than any politician in America, decided that the most powerful thing he could do next was say out loud what Black America had been told for centuries it should be ashamed of. The song went to #1 on the R&B chart almost immediately. White-owned pop radio stations largely refused to play it. The reasoning given was that it was divisive. Program directors said it made white listeners uncomfortable. Some stations went further, calling it inflammatory, as if being proud of being black was the dangerous idea in the room. The irony is that the man recording this song had just saved lives. He had stood between a grieving community and its own rage, and this was the industry's response to that. What the ban cost him was not sales. The sales were massive. What it cost him was his crossover audience, the white listeners he had spent years carefully building a relationship with, the mainstream festival invitations, the pop radio rotation that had been slowly opening up to him. One song, 4 minutes of unapologetic pride, and the door shut. He said it loud anyway. And more than 50 years later, it still rings in every room it enters. Number 9. Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, 1971.
Mother,
The man who ran Motown Records, the most powerful black-owned label in the history of American music, listened to this song and called it the worst record he had ever heard in his life. Berry Gordy refused to release it. The entire quality control department at Motown voted against it. Only Stevie Wonder, sitting in a meeting with executives who could not hear what he was hearing, defended the song and said it was fantastic. Marvin Gaye went on strike. He told Motown he would not record another note until they released it. A Motown executive named Harry Balk, convinced the label was making the biggest mistake in its history, persuaded sales vice president Barney Ailes to press 100,000 singles and send them to radio stations, all behind Berry Gordy's back, without telling anyone.
to bring some loving. Oh.
The song sold 100,000 copies in its first week. It went to #1 on the R&B chart and #2 on the Hot 100. Gordy was forced to admit he had been wrong, and then demanded Gaye immediately record the rest of an album for rush release. What had been called the worst record he had ever heard became Motown's fastest-selling single at the time. The album that followed, What's Going On, was later named the greatest album of all time by Rolling Stone. The song itself is ranked #4 on their 500 greatest songs of all time list. The suppression here was not radio stations refusing to play it. The suppression was the label, a black-owned label, telling one of the greatest artists in its history that his most honest music was too political, too risky, too much. Marvin Gaye looked at the machine that was supposed to carry his music to the people and refused to let it silence him. He was right. They were wrong. And the record has been proving that every day since 1971. Number 8. Edwin Starr, War, 1970. Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong wrote this for The Temptations in 1969. The Temptations recorded it. Fan mail poured in demanding it be released as a single. And Motown lost its nerve, afraid that an overtly anti-Vietnam record would turn the country's conservative audience against one of the label's biggest selling groups. So they gave it to Edwin Starr, a man who had less to lose commercially, and told him to re-record it. Starr did not just re-record it. He owned it. His bristling, furious, ad-libbed vocal turned a protest chant into something that sounded like a man personally offended by every war that had ever been fought. War hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the summer of 1970 and stayed there for 3 weeks. It became the only anti-war song to ever reach #1. It earned Starr a Grammy nomination for Best R&B Vocal Performance. The win went to B.B. King that year, which tells you everything about how the industry ranked its own priorities. Conservative stations still avoided the uncensored message when they could, treating it with the same discomfort they showed every record that asked America a question it did not want to answer. Edwin Starr had proven that political music could be a massive commercial hit. Then he tried to go further. When Starr followed War with more politically charged material, including Hell Up in Harlem in 1974, he discovered the road had a gate. He eventually left Motown and moved to England, where audiences gave him a reverence he never quite found at home. He spent years performing in clubs and theaters across the UK, keeping a career alive through sheer force of talent. Edwin Starr died in Nottingham, England, in 2003. He was 61 years old. The obituaries mentioned war. They barely mentioned everything that came after it. Number 7. Gil Scott-Heron, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, 1970.
Will not be able to stay home, brother.
He was 21 years old when he recorded this. 21. And he had already seen enough of America to know exactly what he was looking at. The song was spoken word over percussion. Not quite rap, not quite poetry, not quite jazz. And radio had no format for it before anyone even got to the content. But the content was the real problem. Scott-Heron ran through a catalog of American consumer culture, television shows, brand names, and diet fads, and systematically dismantled the idea that watching the news from your couch was the same thing as participating in change. No program director was going to play that between commercials. The irony was too perfect, the accusation too direct.
The revolution will not get rid of the nub. The revolution will not make you...
The song did not need radio. It moved the way truth moves. Person to person, hand to hand, neighborhood to neighborhood. The Library of Congress has since documented how it spread through black neighborhoods across the country, in campus coffee shops and nightclubs in West Philadelphia, Harlem, Watts, Chicago's South Side, and Atlanta. Poet Nikki Giovanni remembers hearing Gil perform the song in a Harlem store and feeling encouraged that his voice, strong, black, political, poetic, was out there, shaping the minds of a generation. It was named one of the top 20 recordings of all time by the Library of Congress and added to the National Recording Registry.
During commercials because the revolution will not be televised.
And here is what makes this story devastating. Gil Scott-Heron spent the 1970s and 1980s producing some of the most vital political music in America, fighting addiction along the way, watching artists who borrowed heavily from his blueprint become millionaires while he scraped. He was foundational to hip-hop. He never saw the financial return that foundation deserved. He died in 2011 in a New York City apartment, largely broke. The revolution, as he predicted, was not televised. And neither was his legacy, not until it was too late for him to see it recognized.
Will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun.
Number 6. Curtis Mayfield, Don't Worry, If There's a Hell Below, We're All Gonna Go, 1970. The song opens with a woman's voice preaching from the Book of Revelation. Then Curtis Mayfield shouts, with full echo overdub, "Don't worry, if there's a hell below, we're all gonna go," followed by a scream. And then it breaks into a wall of fuzz bass, Latin percussion, and wah-wah guitar. And before any of that music even fully arrives, he has already called out, in order, sisters, niggers, whiteys, Jews, and crackers. Radio stations across the country refused it immediately. Several banned it outright before the needle even reached the groove the first time. Curtis Mayfield had been paying the price for telling the truth since 1967, when We're a Winner was banned during the riots. By 1970, he had left ABC Records, founded his own label, Curtum, and recorded his debut solo album entirely on his own terms. This was the first song on that album and the first single off it. He was not asking for permission anymore. The song still managed to reach number 29 on the Hot 100 and number 3 on the Soul Singles chart, despite significant radio resistance, because the people who needed it went and found it without radio's help. Kanye West sampled the introduction to Don't Worry If There's a Hell Below on Jesus Walks in 2004, one of the most celebrated rap songs in the history of the genre. D12 sampled it on That's How from Devil's Night. The Afghan Wigs covered it live. The song that several radio stations refused to play in 1970 is baked into the DNA of music that has played in arenas and stadiums for the last 20 years. Curtis Mayfield was paralyzed from the neck down by a falling lighting rig in 1990. He continued making music by dictating lyrics line by line from his bed. He died in 1999. The song he recorded in one take at RCA Studios in Chicago is still running. Some of these songs were banned with a phone call. Some were banned with a raised eyebrow. Some were never formally banned at all. They were just never added, never spun, never pushed. And the difference between those two things is smaller than it sounds, because the result was the same. The people who needed to hear these records most were the last ones to find them. We are halfway through this list, and the top 5 carry the heaviest stories. Number 3 has a detail about what happened inside the recording studio that will stop you cold. And number 1, the most ambitious black music ever put on tape, was cut down, edited, trimmed, and made smaller by an industry that could not handle what it was hearing. Stay with us. If rhythm and legacy means something to you, hit subscribe right now. These stories deserve to be told. Number 5. The Isley Brothers. Fight the Power, 1975. Ernie Isley was in the shower when the chorus hit him. He got out, dripping wet, and wrote it down before it could leave. He and the band recorded both Fight the Power and Harvest for the World on the same day at Kendune Recorders in Los Angeles in 1975. 2 songs, 1 session, 2 completely different directions. They chose Fight the Power to release first. When it came out in May 1975, it was described by one source as a waiting game to see which radio stations were brave enough to play it. The song contained the word bullshit, delivered with full conviction by Ronald Isley, and stations censored it, bleeped it, or refused the uncensored version entirely. Fight the Power still hit number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the Soul Singles chart. Their album The Heat Is On went to number 1 on the Billboard 200. The censorship cost the song certain stations, certain markets, certain listeners who never heard what the Isleys were actually saying. But it could not stop the record from becoming one of the defining statements of its era. The song positioned itself directly within the tradition of What's Going On and We're a Winner, and it named exactly what the others had implied. Fight the power, not politely, not metaphorically. Fight it. Public Enemy heard this record and built their entire artistic identity around the same battle cry, releasing their own Fight the Power in 1989, 14 years later, for Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. When Chuck D said Fight the Power in 1989, he was continuing a conversation that Ronald Isley had started in a studio shower in 1975. One generation of black artists handed the torch to the next, and the station managers who beeped out that one word had no idea what they were dealing with. Number 4. The Temptations. Ball of Confusion, 1970. Motown was a machine built for crossover appeal. Berry Gordy had spent a decade engineering music that could walk through doors built to keep black artists out. So when Norman Whitfield pushed the Temptations into psychedelic soul territory, electric guitars, hard-driving rhythms, politically charged lyrics about Vietnam and segregation and political hypocrisy, the label let it happen because the records were working. Ball of Confusion hit number 3 on the pop charts in 1970. What those numbers hid was that dozens of mid-market radio stations across the South and Midwest simply refused to add it to their playlists. There was no formal ban. Radio bans were never formal. They were a phone call, a raised eyebrow, a program director who just happened to lose the record. The Temptations were allowed to be popular. They were not allowed to be dangerous. And the moment their music started asking questions out loud, questions about why America was fighting a war it could not win, questions about why cities were burning, certain gatekeepers decided the Temptations needed to go back to love songs. The group was fracturing internally. David Ruffin was already gone. Ball of Confusion caught them in the middle of becoming something harder and more honest. And not everyone who had championed them was ready to follow. Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong wrote that song. The same 2 men who wrote I Heard It Through the Grapevine, War, Papa Was a Rolling Stone, and Message from a Black Man. They were the most politically honest songwriting partnership in the history of Motown, and the label's own machinery kept putting ceilings on what their records were allowed to say in public. Ball of Confusion is still one of the most accurate descriptions of American life ever put into a 3-minute pop song. The confusion it described in 1970 never really went away. Number 3. Stevie Wonder, Living for the City, 1973. The full version is 7 minutes and 21 seconds long. It opens with a Mississippi family, a father working his hands to the bone, a mother scrubbing floors, a son trying to get out, and it follows that son all the way to New York City, where he is immediately tricked into carrying drugs and arrested. The scene plays out in a dramatic spoken-word interlude in the middle of the song, with voices, traffic sounds, and a judge sentencing him to 10 years, and then a corrections officer's voice delivering a racial slur that Stevie Wonder insisted be recorded by someone outside the studio because he wanted it to sound exactly like what it was. Real. Unscripted. Impossible to dismiss. Radio stations across the country refused to play that version. The word alone was enough to pull the record off playlists before the music could finish its argument. Stevie Wonder played every instrument on Living for the City himself. Electric piano, bass, drums, Moog synthesizer, hand claps. He was 23 years old. It was one of the first soul songs to explicitly deal with systemic racism using street sounds, sirens, voices, traffic, woven directly into the musical arrangement. The edited single ran 3 minutes and 41 seconds, stripped of nearly 4 minutes of everything that made the original extraordinary. Even that version was avoided by Southern and Midwestern stations that found the content too specific, too honest, too uncomfortable. The song reached number 8 on the Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart. It won the Grammy for Best R&B Song in 1974. Rolling Stone ranks it number 105 on their 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. And the full 7-minute version, the one radio refused to play, the one with the courtroom scene and the slur and the complete emotional arc of a life derailed by a system designed to derail it, is still waiting to be fully heard by the generation that would love it most. Number 2, The Last Poets. When the Revolution Comes, 1970.
When the revolution comes.
They were founded in East Harlem's Mount Morris Park on May 19, 1968, the anniversary of Malcolm X's birthday. 3 men, Abiodun Oyewole, David Nelson, and Gillen Kane. Their name came from a South African revolutionary poet who believed he lived in the last era of poetry, the moment before the world became so violent that words would no longer be enough. They named themselves after the end of something. And then they started recording music that sounded like the beginning of everything that came after it. Radio gave them nothing. Not a format, not a spin, not a call, zero mainstream airplay from the moment the record came out.
When the revolution comes, preacher pimps are gonna split the scene with the communion wine.
Their 1970 debut album sold over 350,000 copies without radio. Their spoken word over African percussion, raw, confrontational, politically uncompromising in a way that made Scott-Heron sound diplomatic, spread through black communities entirely by word of mouth. They had confrontations with the FBI and police. They were connected to the Black Panthers, the Seke, and the SDS. David Bowie named their debut one of his 25 favorite albums, writing in Vanity Fair, one of the fundamental building blocks of rap. Robert Christgau reviewed them in The Village Voice and called them acerbic and exciting and as politically uncompromising as anything ever recorded. When the Revolution Comes told Black America directly, with percussion and fury and zero apology, that the time for hesitation was over, and mainstream radio's response was total silence. Not controversy, not outrage, just silence, as if the record did not exist. The music existed anyway. It went into the bloodstream of every rapper who came after it. Public Enemy, Nas, Common, Erykah Badu, Kanye West. Every one of them collaborated with the Last Poets in their later years because every one of them knew exactly where they came from. The revolution, when it came to hip-hop, came directly from this record.
Slaved our mothers when the revolution comes. When the revolution comes.
Number 1, The Temptations, Masterpiece, 1973.
When I was born, everything was so.
The album version is over 14 minutes long. It opens with a slow cinematic instrumental, strings, bass, percussion, that builds like a storm moving across a flat landscape. When the words finally come, they describe Black American life in the inner city, with a panoramic sweep that feels less like a pop song and more like a feature film. Addicts, conmen, children, hustlers, mothers, preachers, the whole world of a single city block laid out with ache and dignity, and a musical ambition that Norman Whitfield had been building toward for years. Nobody was doing anything like this in 1973, not at Motown, not anywhere in popular music. Radio would not play the full version. The edited single was trimmed to under 4 minutes, stripped of most of what made it extraordinary, and even that version struggled for consistent airplay in markets where the content made program directors nervous. What's heartbreaking is that by this point, Whitfield and the Temptations were making some of the most ambitious black music ever recorded, and the commercial apparatus that was supposed to carry music to the people kept cutting it down, trimming it, making it smaller, making it safer, making it something it was never meant to be. The edited single peaked at number 7 on the pop charts and number 1 on the R&B chart. A 14-minute masterpiece reduced to 4 minutes of what radio could tolerate. Folks coming home. Norman Whitfield never received the full recognition he deserved for the scope of what he did in those years. Barrett Strong, who co-wrote Money That's What I Want, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, and contributed to songs that generated hundreds of millions of dollars, spent decades in legal battles trying to secure royalties and credit that should have been his without argument. The Temptations, who delivered this music with a ferocity that should have made them the most celebrated political band in American history, are remembered mostly for My Girl, a beautiful song, but not the whole story, not even close to the whole story. The full album version of Masterpiece is still waiting to be discovered by the generation that would love it most. That generation is watching this right now. This has been Rhythm and Legacy. If this music means something to you, if these stories matter, hit subscribe, because these are the stories nobody else is telling, and they deserve to be heard.